Hello and welcome to A Deeper Dive with Dara. I'm here today with another one of my OGs, Jim Rosica, Editor-in-Chief. I almost called you executive editor. Editor-in-Chief of City and State, Florida, brand new publication hitting your inboxes in the morning and taking a big role in delivering Florida news to interested folks throughout the state. I am Dara Kam, senior writer with the News Service of Florida. We are both based here in Tallahassee, and Jim and I are going to be talking a little bit today about the launch of our podcast, A Deeper Dive with Dara, and then we are going to take a deep dive into why Republicans don't want to talk to the press.
So in a sense, we're just going full circle. We're going back to the partisan press. And so that's why we have all of the left-leaning news sites and the right-leaning news sites.
You're listening to A Deeper Dive with Dara, a podcast by City and State, Florida.
So Jim Rosica, Editor-in-Chief of City and State, Florida, thank you so much for joining me today for the launch of our brand new podcast, Deeper Dive with Dara, where we'll be taking a deep dive into hot topics that are going on in the state, and we'll be talking with thought leaders, influencers, and other rock stars like Jim Rosica, and we'll take deep dives into the most important issues of the day.
Dara, thank you again for having me here.
Yeah, I'm really happy to have you. Can you talk a little bit, before we get started, into why Republicans don't like us anymore? Can you tell us a little bit about your publication, City and State, Florida, and what you're doing over there across the hall from me?
Sure. So City and State...
Wait, I say hall, but it really isn't a hall. We actually have a house here.
It's the foyer.
Yeah, okay.
Across the foyer.
Okay.
City and State, Florida is an expansion team of sorts. The original City and State started in New York, covering Albany state government and New York City. City Hall was a politics and government website for many years. They've recently expanded to Pennsylvania. So there's a City and State, Pennsylvania, and now that the company that owns us all, GovExec, has acquired the News Service of Florida, they have now expanded the brand, the City and State brand, to Florida. So now we have a City and State Florida, which I am leading up. And so obviously the question is, well, what's the difference between the two? We're both literally housed under the same roof here. The News Service of Florida will continue to cover state government and politics and as a spot news, breaking news source. City and State, and obviously they're a wire service, so they're subscription-based, behind a paywall. City and State will be the free website that will do more lean-back type of journalism, more magazine-type stuff, a little bit longer, a little bit more analytical, so as not to compete with our sisters and brothers across the foyer. So that's kind of our mission. It's an ever-developing thing, and we're continuing to refine it. We're in what I call the soft opening phase. We're going to have our grand opening in a launch event, which I believe is going to be at the Orlando Science Center in September. And so until then, we do a First Read Florida newsletter every morning at 6:45.
Yeah.
We like to keep it punchy and brief. And I'm very gratified that most of the people who have complimented it to me have said that it's great that they read it from top to bottom.
Yes. I do that. I get a lot of these in the morning. These morning newsletters and they are like the thing nowadays. And I probably get 4 of them. And I will say, and not because I have a bias here, but just because of the product that you produce, I read yours top to bottom, and I really love to read it all the way to the bottom because you do that kicker and I'm always excited to see what the kicker is. And the kicker is a quote from somebody important who had something relevant to say about what happened the day before. And so I will say that I am exhausted. I have newsletter exhaustion sometimes, but yours is something that I look forward to reading, and it's the first one that I read and the only one that I read all the way through.
I think that might be our new tagline, City and State Florida. We are the cure for newsletter exhaustion.
Oh, yeah, there you go. You're welcome.
Well, there you
don't even have to pay me 50 cents for that.
There you go. You'll just get residuals.
Oh, wait a second. Can you say that again? What will the tagline be?
I'm thinking that the tagline for our new First Read, well, not so new, but our relatively new First Read Florida newsletter that comes out every morning at 6:45 will be First Read Florida, the cure for newsletter exhaustion.
I've been dying to try that out. Thank you so much.
I've become a punchline. Thank you.
No, you're not. You're not a punchline. You were the setup to the punchline, which was the rim shot.
All right.
Okay.
Very good.
All right. Well, I think we've talked enough about ourselves, don't you? I think we have.
Please, go ahead.
Let's talk about why Republicans don't want to talk. Let's take a deep dive into why Republicans don't want to talk to the press and talk a little bit about an event that took place in, where was that? In Hollywood recently, that the mainstream reporters did not have access to. It was put on, it was called the Sunshine Summit. We are all... journalists are chuckling about the irony of the name, the Sunshine Summit, when many reporters were not allowed to have access to the event. It was put on by the Republican Party of Florida, an event, the annual event with candidates. They have, little groups in the morning, and then they had congressional candidates debating later in the day. They had a dinner that many reporters were allowed to attend, but, dinners are usually kind of non-events in reporter world because they're pretty predictable. So what happened and why did it happen?
So I'll back up a little bit and give you a little bit more of a setup. So this Sunshine Summit, it could be best described as the state Republican Party's big to-do every year. I remember one year, I believe it was, I want to say 2016, I went down when I was with another publication, and all of the Republican presidential contenders were there. Mm-hmm. Ted Cruz was one of them. Marco Rubio was there. And, there was a whole bunch of media. We all went in and covered everybody's, all of the contenders' individual speeches. At that point, it was me and another guy, and we were tag teaming. He'd listen to one and then write while I was listening to another one, and then I'd write. And so we produced a whole bunch of copy. But the point was there was a whole a panoply of traditional legacy media and other folks like us at that time that was new. I would call them new media, and so that was then. And this is now, and so the Sunshine Summit of today, it was not, access was not freely given. It was invite only, and
secret handshake.
You had to have a specific invitation to cover specific portions of the event, and generally, so there were debates between. For instance, the congressional races that were, contested that had more than one Republican candidate. There was also a big victory dinner at the end that I believe the Governor DeSantis gave remarks at. And so I think there was an assumption among many of us in the Florida press, at least the political press, most of which is based here in Tallahassee, that would be that we would just go down, walk in, and cover whatever we wanted, and that was not the case.
Right, and I think this comes out at a time when, and you even use the term legacy media, we have, both of us covered Governor DeSantis since he was elected as governor and observed him quite closely. He has much disdain for what he calls legacy media. He calls corporate media. I think there are other, epithets that are hurled at what, maybe we actually, let me mention here that Jim Turner, one of our staff writers at News Service Florida, was given permission to cover all of the events at the Sunshine Summit. And maybe that, I've always thought maybe that we have a very good reputation, and I haven't thought that. I know that we are highly regarded in the Capitol on Monroe Street in Tallahassee and among legislators and state government agencies. One of the reasons I think that that is the case is that we don't have an editorial page. So we don't endorse candidates, and we don't editorialize on whatever, the topic du jour is. So we don't have a chance to really piss off people who are in power. I say we don't have that opportunity to do that. We can with our stories that are so we're really known for our balance in reporting, and respected for that. And I think that's why Jim, kudos to him for having access to the whole shebang. I think that maybe there are some members of the Capitol Press Corps who might think of being shunned as a kind of a feather in their cap because of the acrimonious relationship that the Capitol Press Corps has with the governor. But, we have a job to do. And if you're not in the room, you can't really do much watchdoggery, can you?
Well, and that brings up the other point here, which is that there were a number of reporters I'm at least aware of because of their tweets who made very clear that even though they were outside in the hallway, I believe some of them literally standing in hallway outside the event, outside the conference hall where everything was going on, were still able to hear pretty clearly all of the relevant speeches, and I suspect actually wrote stories based on what they could hear from outside the hallway. So the idea of, the effectiveness of shutting people out by literally making them stand in a hallway outside, the effect of this is, dubious if not ineffective, as some of those experiences will show.
Yeah, although I will say that I have been to events, including this event, in different locations in the past where candidates have spoken in small rooms to small, like, for example, their legislative delegations. I remember seeing Ron DeSantis at one of these events when he was a congressman, before he was running for governor, and he was addressing the whatever delegation from he was representing Ponte Vedra, so it might have been the Northeast Florida delegation. And there were maybe 20, 25 people in that room with him. Casey DeSantis was with him. Their oldest child was a baby, and they looked like they had stepped out of the pages of the J. Crew catalog, like as they often do. And if I hadn't been able to be inside that room, those doors were closed, I wouldn't have been able to hear anything that took place inside there. So just, advocating here for openness and access for journalists. We are doing our jobs. I wasn't suggesting that. I don't think either of us is suggesting that it's optimal to be sitting in the hallway trying to listen to what's going on in a room on the other side of the door.
It's certainly not optimal, but let me give you a counter to what you're talking about.
Yes.
Let me get you to respond to this. So the counter is, hey, we're the Republican Party. We're not state government. We're not the courts. We're not bound by the Sunshine Laws. We don't need to open up. This is a private event. Whatever we did previously in terms of openness and letting reporters in, hey, that was then, this is now. Now we're going to pick and choose who gets to cover what. Because again, technically this is a private event. What's your response to that?
So I feel like my response is I feel like they're saying, you guys hate us. This is where this comes from. You're not going to give us fair coverage,
right?
Anyway, you guys hate us. You are biased. I mean, how many times I think that the governor, Christina Pushaw, called the media activists, or what was the phrase? Hacktivists. Okay, so the media hacktivists, the liberal media hacktivists, aren't going to give them a fair shake anyway. So why bother letting them in? I think that as a baseline, starting from that as a baseline is dangerous, and it's disrespectful. And I think that being put into that category of liberal hacktivists because you may be asking questions that challenge their positions, or you may be talking to experts that contradict their experts or their positions, should be part of the mix of journalizing. I mean, that's, to me, is you're government officials. They're candidates. I understand that this is not a government sanctioned event, but there were government officials there, including the governor. And so it is relevant to his constituency what he says when he speaks to a room full of people, whether they are Republicans or Democrats or school board members or businessmen or whatever.
Almost like a quasi-official event, you're saying.
Well, I'm saying he still is the governor, and we still have a job to be there and listen to what he says.
And when he speaks, I don't want to say publicly, but when he speaks almost kind of publicly at a private event, he could still make news.
That's right. Hang on, we'll take a short break. I'm here today with Jim Rosica, Editor-in-Chief of City and State Florida.
Here at Deeper Dive, we want to hear from you, the listeners. We invite you to send your questions, comments, and feedback to our mailbag. You can reach us at deeperdive@cityandstatefl.com. That's deeperdive@cityandstatefl.com. Get your 2 cents in by sending us an email.
Welcome back to A Deeper Dive with Dara. So what do you think about what I said?
Well, let me continue to play the devil's advocate position here, which is it a fair question in this day and age to ask, maybe the issue is there a line between hit pieces and accountability journalism? Are the Republicans, are the partisans confusing accountability journalism for quote unquote hit pieces, or are there specific examples? I'm not going to be able to think of any sitting right here where an outlet maybe crossed the line or pursued or published a story in a form that maybe I wouldn't have edited that way or somebody else wouldn't have, but what have you.
I agree. I do see that among legacy media, and it pains me to say that I do see that, and I, especially from their perspective, I can understand that they experience that and they view that as unfair. I also think that they are relevant, when I say our, and I don't think that we really are NSF and a City and State FL. Do we call you CSFL?
We ourselves do refer to ourselves as CSFL.
So NSF and CSFL.
Yes.
And don't tell Jim Saunders, my big boss, because he really hates acronyms. But okay, so I feel like we really are straight down the middle. We don't really tread on that kind of territory. But I think the rules have changed now because, as I said, there is so much pushback on stories that challenge what the administration, and speaking specifically about the Governor Ron DeSantis administration, that they really do not, they don't abide stories that challenge their positions. maybe I'm overstating it, but what I wanted to say, there are many more outlets to communicate their messages and their quote unquote news and their events using other outlets that would be like Breitbart, for example, is a more traditional form of that, or OAN, that would be communicating their messages in a much more friendly way. And so they don't really need us to get their message out, certainly not to their supporters. And I think maybe there might be some thinking that, oh, well, if you read let's just say, for example, Miami Herald, if you're reading the Miami Herald, then, you're already kind of drinking their Kool-Aid. So we're not going to try to appeal to you, Miami Herald reader. We're going to try to appeal to somebody who reads, a different kind of a publication.
Well, and it's very complicated. Also remember, going back to the beginnings of this country, that journalism started as, the partisan press. There was, the newspaper that was affiliated with the Federalists and the newspaper that was affiliated with the Whigs. And then, decades upon decades passed, and you had, the Hearsts and the other tycoons who spoke through the pages of the newspapers that they owned. And then about the mid 20th century and certainly, around the Watergate era, you had the professionalization, quote unquote, of journalism and the neutralization, I hate to use that word, of most big city newspapers that became owned by big, corporations like Knight Ridder, which no longer exists. And so, in a sense, we're just going full circle. We're going back to the partisan press, and so that's why we have, all of the left-leaning news sites and the right-leaning news sites, and then, folks who try to play it down the middle. But say the other problem there is that as soon as you do a story that catches somebody crosswise, in their mind, now you're branded as that site that's, the hippies, because they did one story that somebody didn't like that was perceived as a little bit too liberal or, too critical of my favorite candidate or candidates. And so now you've just kind of redoubled their confirmation bias that you're, fake news.
So what do you think how does that bode for politics and for the electorate? What impact will this have on people 5, 10, it's hard to predict, but, now and in the future?
Well, listen, we survived. The Republic survived the partisan press. Possibly was even, all the better because of it in some sense. And for all of the, the good and the bad, for all of the yellow journalism of the late 1800s, early 1900s, for all of the, professionalization of journalism and the big city newspapers, we're still here. There are those of us who are still prosecuting journalism to the best of our ability, and
he's a lawyer.
It's it's always a challenge
for reals
to do journalism that is seen as fair, because as soon as a reader feels as though an ox has been gored, you're on the bad side of that readership. But speak truth to power.
I got to tell you,
let it land where it does. I don't know.
I got to tell you that I'm going to share an anecdote with you, because this is a phrase that really pains me. Being called an enemy of the people really personally hurts me. My parents are both buried in Arlington National Cemetery. I stand any time in the press gallery, when they say the Pledge of Allegiance, before the sessions begin, I stand and I put my hand over my heart and I say the Pledge of Allegiance out loud. I don't just move my lips, I actually say it out loud. But I was at a rally for President Trump before he was elected in Fort Pierce. And I don't know if any of our listeners have ever attended any of these rallies. It was in a large arena. There were probably 25,000 people there. And they put all the press in the center of the arena. And they put, those cattle gates around it. And it's like it's the cage where the press are. And there's risers for the TV cameras. And I happened to be sitting next to Jim Acosta in this particular rally, which is a whole nother story. So I'll save that for another day.
Fair enough.
Save that for another day. But midway through his speech, then candidate Trump pointed to the cage of reporters and said, and shook his finger at us and called us the enemy of the people. And the crowd roared, and they turned and they came towards us, and there were security there, and some of them started shaking the gates. And I actually was glad I was sitting next to Jim Acosta because he happened to have 2 personal bodyguards with him, and so I felt much safer. But it really it pained me. It hurt me because I feel that, and I don't want to get too preachy and soapboxy here, but I do feel that we as journalists in the ilk of journalism that you and I do and have done for decades, Jim, we are public servants. And the backbone of a democracy is a free and open press. And so I worry about where we're headed when, it's not just these events that are private events, as you say. We have a very difficult time getting the governor's office to respond to emails. Forget about phone calls, but just when we're asking for basic information as a part of doing our job. I mean, I sound whiny, and I don't like to sound whiny about doing my job. It's just the cost of doing business, I guess.
Hashtag whining is not a strategy.
Right.
I'm not saying you're whining, but I
feel like I'm whining.
I agree with the concept that whining is not a strategy.
Okay.
I made a pact with myself that when I submit a public records request and it does not get fulfilled in the time that I think it should be fulfilled in, I am not going to get on social media and complain about that.
I don't do that either.
I'm going to, do the lawyerly thing and ask questions and write letters and not vent.
Yeah, well, I'm venting with you here in the terracotta room, and I guess that's about all I can do, and probably more than I should have done. Okay.
I'm glad you have your own amen corner right there. Okay, that's great.
Okay. Well, are there any closing thoughts about
Dara as she sits on her brocaded chair as I'm sitting here on a rickety folding chair? That gives you
He's lying.
The balance of power here in the terracotta room.
He's sitting in the leather chair. He's sitting in the leather kind of army. It's the
pleather chair.
He's got the more comfortable chair.
That may be.
Anyway, so thank you so much, Jim Rosica. Before I say goodbye to you, I want to just let our readers know that Jim and I will be doing a monthly chat about what's going on in state politics, state government, what's the hottest topic. And so you will have your 2 OGs once a month right here in the terracotta room. And should I give an amen for that, or should I just stop?
You do whatever you want. There we go. Thank you very much.
Oh, man, they created a monster.
Sometimes you just got to amuse yourself.
All right. Anyway, thank you so much, Jim Rosica. I really appreciate you joining me today and taking a deeper dive into journalism and the new era, and I'm looking forward to having you back and chatting with you once a month.
Well, thank you so much. And just a very quick plug, we are always online, City and State, that is at City and State FL, and is spelled out, cityandstatefl.com. And if you go on the website, you can sign up there for our morning newsletter, First Read, Florida, but if you want the direct URL, it is cityandstatefl.com/newsletters.
And you can listen to A Deeper Dive with Dara once a week, and you can find that on Apple Podcasts. And I think we're going to be soon up and available at all of your favorite podcasts, wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. So
that's really exciting.
Yeah.
You know, you should get some design to go along, like a logo to go along with your...
hang on. Check out City and State FL's website, and you might just encounter that brilliant logo for A Deeper Dive.
It'll be a picture of Dara Kam sitting in her brocaded chair.
In the terracotta room.
Terracotta room.
Thanks a lot, Jim.
Thank you so much.
A Deeper Dive with Dara is a podcast by City and State Florida, hosted by Dara Kam, produced by Ryan Daly, and music for the podcast was recorded by Periodic Labs, LLC, and performed by Ryan Daly and Danny Reyes.